Hello, everyone. We are back for another CSM20 interview. And before we get started, I just want to remind you that I am doing this so that you, the viewer, can go and find out a little bit about the different candidates that are interviewing. But I'm also doing this so that my communities can decide who are going to go on the ballot. I do not choose this myself as CEO. My management team on the Warm Life side is going to decide for Warm Life, and my community team on Eve Rookie side will decide Eve Rookie. And with that being said, we'll just go ahead and jump right in. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us how you got started in Eve and a little bit of what you do.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me on your program to talk to people. I started about 10 years ago. I played with a couple of guys. I had been playing with a different game, a much more softball game than Eve, with a couple of guys, and they said they were going to try this new game, so I joined them here. The three of us started the game together. We figured out how to mine and rat and do various things just by happening to log in at about the same time. We were in the same time zone and just had a wonderful time learning the game together. Those two characters are still sitting in my corp today. Neither are playing the game anymore. But I'm so sentimental about that start to it that I refuse to remove them from the corp. So they are there to remind me kind of the true meaning of friendship in a game. And I've done the normal kind of various new player activities, missions, and mining and ratting. I joined, I don't know if people would remember this, I joined Phoenix Federation, which was a pretty big nullsec corp several years ago, many years ago. They were defeated in a war. We were defeated in a war and dissolved. And I was invited to start a new renter program with Phoenix, and really enjoyed kind of starting something new and figuring out how to appeal to people and just run a good business. Right now, I'm part of fraternity. I love Norris. He has been a wonderful space boss for me, and had do a lot of different things now on the leadership team, primarily acting as rental manager and also heading up the English side of the Diplo team. So that's kind of an overview. I guess that's all I have to say on that question.
Excellent. So you've been playing around 10 years. Why run for CSM now?
You know, my experience as a Diplo, I think, really made me feel confident about being qualified, um, as well as having worked within fraternity for long enough to also feel confident of being able to represent um, the null sec arena.
Okay.
I, I do. I just want to mention though that I do really have a heart for the new player experience. I don't know if everybody would necessarily retain that heart as they move forward in the game. Maybe they do, but I remember, this is kind of an embarrassing thing, but I remember when I first realized that it was a three-dimensional game and not a two-dimensional game. And I had so much trouble navigating because I would click on a station and then I'd look at my overview and I was getting farther away and I'm going, how could that possibly happen? I just clicked on it. Why am I not going toward it? And I vividly remember that moment when it occurred to me what the answer to that question was. Wait a minute, this is a 3D game. So that's just one example of kind of the new player experience. It's easy to forget.
Yeah,
But I still remember, and I still feel like I'm representing the new players.
those small little hurdles, and even after playing for 5.5 years myself, you 10 years, there's those little things that people are like, you didn't know that. It's
Yeah,
like I
I
was
know.
this many days old when I found out.
Yeah. And how did I not notice that particular screen or button you could
Yeah,
push all this
exactly.
time? Yeah. Yeah.
So of course, since you're running, you probably have a platform. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Maybe like 3 points from your platform.
Sure, okay. My platform is good decision making, using data, listening to people, really paying attention to the bigger picture. Uh, Decision making is just so much better when you have a group of people who put their minds together. I'm a big believer in making decisions based on both the cost and the benefit, or the pros and the cons of a
Mm,
particular issue being discussed. And I notice it in discussions, a lot of times it's kind of one group of people who are passionate about the pros and another group of people who are passionate about the cons. And then all they do is just repeat
mm,
between them the same arguments. And I think if everybody in that discussion started looking at both the pros and the cons, you then have a more nuanced conversation where you're discussing the magnitude of each side, and I think can make a better decision together.
okay.
Secondly, the new player experience, I've talked about that. Um, and then thirdly, um, I guess my own kind of more personal feeling, I work a lot on infrastructure work, particularly with the recent introduction of Equinox. There's just a lot of work to do there, a lot of detail
Mm-hmm.
work. And there's just a lot of time spent, I think too much time spent as a whole across the organization on administrative things, like managing an infrastructure and figuring out how you're going to organize your workforce and power and all those spreadsheets and everything. They're fun, but there's just too much of that.
Yeah.
And so I would like to find some ways of just getting people more often and longer just on the field, shooting each other and blowing things up and having fun with the game.
Okay, excellent. So we're going to dive into some what I think are fun questions. These pretty much align with my own platform, getting players to undock. So the first question is, what do you think one of the biggest barriers is for new players getting undocked?
The standard answer to that is fear, and I agree with that. You suddenly realize you're a body floating in space, and what happened to your ship as a new player. I think though that there's kind of a missing chunk of newish player experiences that could be addressed better and hasn't been talked about a lot. And that's kind of the next stage after you've kind of realized, well, this is just pixels, and if I lose my venture, I can go buy another one. I just have to do a little bit of work to put it back together again. Um, but then there's that stage that's kind of medium new, where people are starting to build their corpse. And often, suddenly, when you realize kind of this part of the game, it's easy to suddenly have these big ideas pretty soon when you're still relatively new, where you want a huge corp and you want to be presiding over a huge alliance and you've got these big plans. And I have these players at this stage often who come to me and want to join fraternity. And it's a hard conversation, because what I have to say to them is it's too early for you to, and they come and they have all these requests. Well, I want these different corps, and I need some sov, and by the way, I'm going to need to put up a bunch of structures, and I expect to, triple my size within 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, just these big
Mm-hmm.
plans. And I have to tell them it's going to take longer than that to come up with that vision. You can start now, but you've got to be willing to start a little bit more slowly. So, for example, this would be common probably with many such requests, but let's say they have alliance with 35 people corpse in it. And I might say, I know you probably feel sentimental about your alliance, and you made up this wonderful name and maybe you have a logo for it. And it's really hard to give that up temporarily. But if you can consolidate those corps into a single corp, then you can come back to me and apply to join fraternity. But an alliance that's structured that way is not going to work in our particular environment. And so it would be nice to have a kind of some suggestions for them of in-game helps. So brand new player, they have missions they can do, and they have a tutorial they can do, and they have guidance kind of, now your step is to go and do this. And I'd love to see a little bit more of that available to people who are at the more medium stage and are
Hmm.
thinking about building corps. And how do you build your corp? Well, I need to pick out some directors, but I shouldn't have too many. But I need to trust them, and just kind of those kinds of. What am I going to do about the shares? Um, do I want to give out shares within my corp? What are the advantages and disadvantages? You can look up that information, but there's no like step-by-step tutorial that would be nice to be able to refer people to.
That would actually be really cool because my expertise in the game is community building, and people think that I came up with a 4,500 person community overnight, but it's taken 4.5 years. And for the last 2 years, I've been speaking at FanFest and Eve Amsterdam solely on community building. And yeah, people need to have a way to scale up. They see, frat, they see goons and horde, and they have these big dreams, but they don't realize that you have to start small and you have to scale up. Because if you start too big, then you have big holes to fill.
And let me kind of throw in one idea I had when I started thinking about this. Um, if you go, one of the first things you do when you become a CEO is look through all your screens and figure out what everything is. And there's those screens where you can set roles for people
Hmm.
and titles for people. And there's some amount of guidance there on what kinds of roles you need to fill. Okay, you probably need somebody who has charge of your wallet, and somebody else who's your communications manager, and there's nice little titles for those. That's a nice help, but it's
Yeah.
not a step-by-step guidance. And you could have, first of all, more different jobs. You run out of screen pretty soon setting them up. And also, along with, okay, press these buttons to set roles for people, other kinds of tools. So let's say you have somebody that you want to assign as a Diplo. Maybe there's a case management
Mm.
tool within the game. I have a very elaborate case management tool set up with Excel, um, but it's also pretty straightforward. I mean, it wouldn't, it's just columns of information. And so that would be something that would guide somebody who was new to the Diplo role to know, okay, here's a tool. And it also gets people looking at those tools before they really, really need them. So if you're fairly small, you probably don't need a case management tool. You just have a
Yep.
Diplo that helps people. But if you have one early and get people started in the habit of entering their cases onto the tool, then you have a working model when things start getting larger and more hectic.
I love that. We have an HR section on our Discord, and it took a while to get everyone trained to do it the way that I wanted to do it. And if we would start that from the beginning, yeah, it would have been so much easier. So now we're gonna think about fleets. What role do you think fleets have in player retention? Not just new players, but players in general.
The kinds of community that you build when people share a an exciting fleet experience. There's no other way to do that other than a fleet type of thing where people really are risking their ships and their ISK, and there's an enemy, a common enemy, and there's necessary conversation that goes on, and a certain amount of banter that's just going to arrive naturally between humans when you're in that kind of a situation. And then that shared experience of both the losses as well as the wins, the everybody going, "Eh." And that's such an important part of community and human experience. I don't know if I can think of any other way to duplicate that part of community other than something like a fleeting experience.
So, we talked a little bit about toxicity before we started this interview. Do you think that toxicity is keeping players from undocking, especially new players?
Um, I don't know if it discourages them from undocking, because you can undock alone and, go do your PI, things like that. Um, but I think it can cause people to leave the game itself. Um, and the thing that's tough about it, I work in probably a more multicultural environment than many alliances in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So we are about 80% Chinese and 20% all of the other languages. And we call it the English side, but it includes lots of other languages. But there is one of the things I realized early in the game is that I don't necessarily come into a situation and automatically recognize when I'm reading banter or hearing banter, or if I'm hearing a real high drama, actual anger type of scenario. And I don't know if it's just me. I think it's just being in a multicultural environment, you have less of a common understanding of what's true toxicness, and what is banter or play or jokes.
Right.
And I just think it's really important for people to understand that there's a difference, and just, use the error method, take your hands off the keyboard when you're getting upset, and just think about it, and maybe even ask, are you guys bantering or is this
Right.
real? Um, and it's actually one of the reasons why I like having a case management system, because people aren't going to fill out a case unless they're actually angry. And so I don't have to deal with things that turn out to just be friendly banter. Banter is important to be able to do, but you got to be aware that you need to know your audience.
Yeah.
And it's very, very, very easy for people to misinterpret things when you're in such a diverse environment. Even people who all speak the same language or live in the same country, you don't necessarily
Yep.
realize how limited your real life um, social experience is to, a certain fairly small group of people.
Yep.
And that expands really quickly in a game like this. And so I think the first thing that's important is to just get people, I try to encourage people to really think about it and not necessarily react immediately to
Right.
things, and allow for those differences. Just ask, was that a joke? Or um, so, as far as what CCP can do, there are some to- toxic things that can be said that are pretty universally
Mm-hmm.
not good. um, and so I do like to be able to kind of partner with CCP, because there are some things that I just tell people, you gotta send that to CCP. That's
Yeah.
not something that I'm gonna try, that's illegal, or, I mean, just really, really bad and clearly bad, kind of
Mm-hmm.
across everybody or most people. I want to be able to send people to CCP, but I don't necessarily think that CCP would be the right people to handle those kind of subtleties of what
Yeah.
actually is toxicity and isn't. So we have to take our own environment, and the leadership has to also be pretty engaged in understanding that and figuring out how they want to deal with it. We have a no a real my one of my favorite rules is just no political conversations, just not even friendly ones. We don't talk politics at all, because that's a really fast way to get from banter into
Yep.
people that are really angry. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree on that. If you just don't talk about it, then bad feelings can't creep in, and you keep a more wholesome environment. So now we're gonna go back to players, and this is all players. What do you think keeps players logging in?
I think Eve is such a big and diverse sandbox that you never get to the end of the options of things to try and get involved in. So the thing keeping one of the major things I think people keeping people logged in is just the variety. Okay, I'm bored mining, but there's 20 other things I can go do that just pop to mind, and then another 20 probably if I go looking for them. So variety as well as a variety of the kind of experience it is. So you can log in and have like really big scary fights and spill your coffee on the floor because you get all upset about one thing or another. And then you can go and do, easy relaxing things and take your Helios out and do some exploring and be able to do that in a pretty relaxed way. And you have that kind of options
Right? Do,
available.
do you think that the daily opportunities in their current form is a reason that a lot of players are logging in daily?
Do you mean like the events?
No, the uh go three jumps, manufacture an item, those daily opportunities.
Oh, yes, and there are some things that, like manufacturing, you mentioned that you have to kind of keep watching it and know when your jobs are going to come out and be involved that way. So yes, I do think that having daily things to do and keep up on keeps people coming back.
So, since you live out in Nullsack, do you think that more people log in during peacetime or wartime?
Wartime, that's kind of well known. In nullsec, that's not necessarily true in other parts of the game, but a lot of times people come to nullsec because they want the adventure of it. And so wartime is an adventure.
Cool. Now, our solo players, we can't forget about them. Do you think that we should encourage solo players towards group content, or do you think we should just leave them alone?
I really don't like to try to change how people want to play the game. Um, and, introverts and extroverts, you have different personalities in real life, and those personalities are brought to the game. And so people who really want to turn on some nice music and just relax and play solo, I think I don't have any reason to want to change how they would prefer to play. They, I do want, though, for it to be obvious to them that there are also community activities available. So if they get bored, just logging in and doing PI and then logging out or whatever they're doing solo, um, that if they get to the point where they're looking for something different, that's pretty easily available to them.
Do you think that CCP should put in some more solo content in the game? Right now, we basically have exploration, abyssals. Yes, you could say like ratting and stuff like that, but it depends on where you are in space, whether it's really a solo activity or not.
Yeah, PI is another one I would
Mm,
consider solo,
yeah,
but I guess my only I'm not sure there needs to be more because there's missions you can do solo too that have quite a variety within those missions. Um, I guess my main kind of personal thing is that I spend a lot of time um, in fleets or doing other things that involve controversy and drama and adventure. Um, and sometimes I don't want any more
yeah.
drama and adventure. I don't want people shooting at me. I just want to. PI, for example, is something that I have enjoyed just those days when I just want to do something quietly that's pretty easy. Um, and I like those things to stay easy. So PI added in the drones coming in. So now I have to be a lot more attentive and race away if my shield gets too low. Um, so, I don't want to make everything into this giant adventure. Sometimes I
Right.
don't want adventure.
Okay. So this summer there was an operation out in Providence. I am sure that you're absolutely aware of the eviction of Absolute Order. Um, it was a very interesting thing to watch from the outside because it was almost a MPSI eviction operation. Uh, Groups from all over came together to get them out of there due to their toxicity. And for those of you who don't know who Absolute Order is, there's a lot of stuff out on Reddit and YouTube, so go look it up. But it's very toxic, and this is real world stuff coming in that just should not be in our game. Now, for you, do you think that this was a good thing that the community did? Do you think that they should have just kind of left it alone, or are you indifferent? Where do you kind of stand on the whole event?
Yeah, I thought that was really, first of all, interesting to have the community kind of come together against toxicness. And I did support doing that. I liked it. um, our own FC team positioned that as summer camp training experience for us. It was kind of fun. They made it into a little bit of a whimsical, fun thing, even though there was a relatively serious reason behind it. And I liked that mix and that way of handling it. And I think the community made their point, and we got some extra experience for our FC team as well out of that.
Yeah, I thought the content was pretty good content that came after it. A lot of people aren't going to get to see a Keep Star blow up or, be part of something that monumental. So I did think it was cool that people from all over could go and experience that. Now we're going to go into some CSM specific questions. The first one
Okay.
is if CCP asked you as a CSM, what is one quality of life thing that they could implement for you? What would you ask for?
Make everything copy pastable.
Oh, God, yes.
So I get so tired of logging into a screen and go, okay, was this one I could copy over into a spreadsheet? Or am I going to have to do a lot of scrolling? And it's just, particularly screens that can only be accessed by people with a limited number of people with pretty specialized roles that you have to trust to give them those roles,
Mm-hmm.
and then make those people who are going to be leaders in the organization and probably have a lot to do scrolling through these screens because you can't delegate that to other people.
Yeah.
So just making it possible to copy paste everything rather than just some selected things over would be tremendously helpful to me.
I I'm 100% on that one. Being the person that does all the statistics and, the massive spreadsheets I have, that is a pretty big complaint of mine. If you make it onto the CSM, what other candidate types do you want to work with? So we're not looking at the actual candidates themselves, but like what type of experience would you really want to work with for a well-rounded CSM?
I really think it's valuable to have people, as it's kind of structured now, coming in from different parts of the game. Um, so players that have other experience, like I'm really not an FC type person. Um, there are reasons for that. Like I tend to analyze things too much, which makes me good at some things and not good at other things, like FCing. So we need to have people who are FCing and good FCs
Mm-hmm.
there, as well as, wormholes, new players, high sec, low sec, faction warfare. Just having all of those things covered keeps Eve, a true, large sandbox game, which is one of my objectives.
Okay. Uh, what is it your approach going to be to show CCP that you have player support for different issues? Like, for example, Mick Fightmaster has the Wormhole UN. I have two massive communities that I poll people from if CCP wants to know something specific. Uh, Oz, he always puts out a community poll at the beginning of his term to get, massive wish list of quality of life stuff. So, what do you think your method for showing player support is going to be?
Well, Luke, my predecessor, set up just a CSM office hours channel within Winter Coalition. So of course I would use that. And there's a lot of activity there, so you get a lot of information about what people are looking for. Um, and also, if I have a Diplo relationship with another Diplo in another nullsec alliance, um, asking for their inputs as well. I think that it's important not to just get, there's a bunch of people who are asking for X, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I like to get stories to go along with that. I think so it's not that people want that. So, as an example, when I gave the request about copy pasting things, I also gave an example.
Right.
Um, and a story. Here's my experience, and here's what it feels like to be in that situation. And so I like to get people to tell me, okay, if you want a particular thing, tell me how it affects you not to have it.
Okay.
And then I can tell those stories as a way of, supporting their request.
So, and I'm sure you've heard stories from Luke and other frat CSM that have come before him about players being just a little crazy. And sometimes they will bring
This is
very
Eve.
I know, right? They'll bring the
Of
most
course. Yeah.
unreasonable requests, or they demand that you do something about this thing that CCP did that they really don't like. How do you think you're going to handle these situations with these particular players?
Um, well, if I have enough time, if there's too many and I can't do this with everybody, I acknowledge that could be the case. But um, I owe them listening to why they are asking for that particular thing. I also owe the community to find out how many other people. Is this a one person just has a beef about something and nobody else does? Or is it something that is pretty common issue with people? So I think both of those things, the depth of understanding why and also the breadth of understanding how many people have the same issue.
And kind of on the same line of thinking, players kind of expect the CSM to march into the office and tell CCP how to develop their game. Um,
Yeah.
that doesn't work out too terribly well. But how do you think you're going to handle the public? And when we say this, like, think about Reddit, telling you that you're not a very effective CSM because you're not going and telling CCP these things.
Yeah. Um, it's just another story. Before I retired, I worked for a large computer company on the marketing side of things. And one of the things I would have really loved to have was a permanent focus group that was in the room next door, that I could go talk to about, what they wanted, and what kinds of things, what kinds of ideas do they like and what kinds of ideas don't they like. Um, so the idea of a focus group like situation where we give feedback and um, information about what the players um, really, really want to see kind of as a whole, or the majority players, that's really useful. And a good company as successful as Eve has been, you know, must listen to their customers. And so us providing that information to them is going to be pretty valuable and have an influence, It doesn't mean that we make the decisions. They're business decisions made by developers and marketers, just like in any business.
Yep,
Um, but giving feedback that is listened to is tremendously valuable, I think.
totally agree. Now, you made it to the CSM. Congratulations. On on the very first meeting, typically you'll get to, or maybe the second meeting, depending on how they're going to roll with it. They tell you what is on board for your term. So usually you'll get to hear a little bit about the next expansion that's coming up that your term will really get their fingers in, and maybe some other really high level stuff. However, you suddenly find out that nothing that you really have expertise in is going to be part of the next expansion. Now, for someone who's been playing as long, I know that this is a little harder to think, but I don't know. Maybe they decided that they're not going to do anything with Null this particular expansion, nothing with new player experience or corporations. How do you think that you're going to deal with that particular term, not dealing with anything that you have experience with?
Now, several things. First of all, I'd go read the NDA again, make sure I understand it. And the reason why, because I've thought about that too. Um, and one of the things I wonder about is, okay, if there's going to be some new thing, let's just pretend it's missions, something in the area, redoing missions, let's say something like that. Um, and maybe it's been 15 years since I've done missions. I would want to go over and do a bunch and get experience there. And so one of the reasons I would read the NDA is because if I accidentally did that on a character that people recognized, well, that's an Arrowspeed character, um, they would kind of go, okay, well, let's see, Arrowspeed's on the CSM and now she's doing all these missions. So I'm guessing that would be a clue to people without me actually saying anything. And how obligated am I to watch out for that kind of thing to happen, to reveal things to people you may not want me to reveal? Um, so once I kind of understood the limitations, I would go study up on it. I would read our CSM office hours channel and look for, I probably couldn't ask a lot of questions of people, but I could go look for information. And there's always Mr. Google to help me and learn as much as I can. Also, I think it would be important for me to use my kind of Diplo skills. Let me give an example. We are wrestling right now with something that I think a lot of people are wrestling with, which is faction warfare, shooting
Mm,
blues in
mm-hmm.
faction warfare, right? I'm not a faction warfare player. I've never joined faction warfare before. Um, but we have people who do faction warfare, and they came to me with their answer for what they wanted to do. And they said, here, Arrow, here's what we want to do. Let's add this to the rules, the Winter Core rules. And I looked at it and I realized that there were a lot of holes in that. And then when I went and did some research on faction warfare, I realized that there were even more holes in that. So I came back to them and I said that this strategy that you have of, giving them a list of people that are normally blue, but they're not going to be blue when you're playing faction warfare, and this other list of players that are normally blue, but you can't shoot them in faction warfare. And sometimes you're going to be in faction warfare space, and sometimes you're going to not be in faction warfare space, and sometimes you're going to be in a faction warfare fleet, and you're going to be fighting a militia, but then maybe you might not be in a fleet, but you might be fighting a militia, the opposing militia. So there's all these scenarios,
Right.
and the rules that they came up with are so complicated that I said, a person can't first of all, go look on the wiki and read all those rules and memorize them every time they go play. Um, it's hard to reset your standings um, individually for each of those cases. So, so my response to that was to at least go figure out what they were actually asking for as far as the rule goes and lay out the scenarios one by one. So I said, all those different ones I just gave, I wrote them out and I said, tell me what happens in this scenario, this scenario, this scenario. And I had a bunch. And then I looked at it and figured out ways of just from an information perspective, consolidating that into a few rules that would end up covering what the faction warfare team wanted to cover.
Right.
And then I came back and I made the long page of descriptions of lists of things and all the things that were asked for. And I consolidated into, I think it was 4 lines of rules. Okay, these 4 rules, if we applied those 4, would that cover all the scenarios we need to cover? And generally when I can do that, and it's usually fairly easy for me to summarize and consolidate information that way, just by what people tell me they want. If I can organize it for people, then get feedback from the team saying, is this right? Or if it's not right, what's wrong? We then end up with a pretty concise, usable set of rules. So that would be a value that I could provide
Right.
without
With
having a lot of experience in that particular area. Yeah.
So we are starting to run out of time, so we're going to come to the last question. And this has been
Okay.
an issue probably from the beginning of time, and that's projection. I know on CSM18 it was a hot button issue, probably 17, 16, 15. I know it was for 19. Um, do you think that CCP has done enough with projection with the changes they put out for the June expansion, or do you feel that you're going to have to bring it up and advocate for more changes if you got onto CSM20?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I know how I would approach it, which is to find out from the players, how is this working?
Okay.
Um, and again, take that information and look for commonalities and look for stories. So, okay, somebody's, got this great industrial park sitting over in low sec someplace and they really just want to do industry and people keep jumping in and shooting down their structures. I'm just making that up, but let's suppose something like that was happening. Well, that's a story that I have then to express. We're not quite there yet. So I would look for that, and I also would look for quantity. How many players are still having issues with that? So those 2 things are things that I could, that would be what I'd be focusing on trying to put together.
Okay. So we have arrived at final thoughts. Why should
Okay.
players vote for you, and why should my communities put you on our ballots?
So I'm a big block player um, who cares also about new players. And I also care about nullsec itself not being entirely big blocks. So we need to be able to accommodate the little blocks too. And um, my commitment to keeping Eve a big, huge, wonderful, exciting, fun sandbox covering all of the different options that players have. I think that's where my passions lie and where I think I can really provide good value.
Awesome. So if someone comes and watches this interview and they would like to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
They can send me a friend request in Discord to Arrowspeed. And there are 3 E's in Arrowspeed. And by the way, the reason for that is when I first joined the game, somebody else had the name that had 2 E's in it. So I still have 3 E's in my name. But anyway, you can just send me a PM and I answer them pretty quickly.
Cool.
Or you can post onto the CSM webpage.
And we'll put
Post your
that
question.
in the description of the video when it goes up. Do you answer your email?
Not very up. At least every like 2 months, I answer it. That was a joke. Um, I am not good about answering email, though, not nearly as good as I am about Discord messages. So if you send me an email, may not get to it for a week or so.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for coming and doing the interview, and best of luck in your campaign.
Thank you very much for having me.